I live in a pretty quiet townhouse community. Nothing fancy, just a row of units with a firewall between each one. The walls are thick, about 20 inches of solid concrete. You can barely hear anyone next door. No muffled TV sounds, no footsteps, nothing. That's why the first time I heard my neighbor, it scared the hell out of me. It was close to 2 in the morning, and I shot awake to this sound I couldn't place at first. It wasn't music, it wasn't banging, it wasn't the usual late-night party noise. It was screaming. And not just any screaming, it sounded guttural, angry, like someone was shouting profanities at the top of their lungs. I could hear her voice cutting through the concrete wall like it was nothing, filling my bedroom. For a moment, I froze. I wasn't sure if she was fighting with someone, or if someone had broken into her unit. Then I realized it was just her. She was screaming alone. I laid there, heart pounding, listening to every word. Some of it was nonsense. Some of it was cursing, strung together in ways that didn't even make sense. And the way she screamed, it didn't sound like normal yelling. It was deep, raw, almost inhuman. The next morning, I figured maybe it was a one-off. Maybe she'd had a bad night. But it kept happening. Every couple of nights, always past midnight, those same blood-curdling screams would echo through the wall. Sometimes it lasted 5 minutes. Other times, it went on for nearly an hour. Other neighbors noticed too. The woman on her opposite side actually called the cops more than once for a welfare check. I remember one night, flashing red and blue lights reflected across my blinds as officers knocked on her door. She never answered. Eventually, they left, and the screaming started again a week later, like nothing had changed. Her family had even been contacted. I don't know if it was her parents, siblings, or someone else, but they never did anything about it. She still lived there, still screamed at night, still kept everyone on edge. But one night, it escalated. I'd just gone to bed. It was around 1:30 when I heard it start again. The guttural shouts, the violent strings of curses. My chest tightened immediately. I pulled the blanket up and just listened, telling myself it would stop like it always did. Then, bang! The sound slammed through the wall so hard I jumped upright in bed. It was like she'd thrown her body against the wall right where my head had been resting. My heart was pounding as I sat there, frozen. And then, another sound. 3 slow knocks. Not on her side, on mine. Directly against my bedroom wall. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the plaster, waiting for something else. After what felt like forever, the screaming cut off, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I barely slept after that. And the next morning, I dragged myself to work like a zombie, second-guessing whether I'd even heard it the way I thought I did. But no matter how I try to explain it away, I can still hear those 3 knocks in my head. The truth is, I've lived in plenty of places before, and I've never had a problem with neighbors. But this is the first time I've ever been genuinely afraid of the person living right next door. And I can't help but wonder, if she's capable of doing that in the middle of the night, what else might she be capable of? When I first moved into this house, I thought I'd finally found a peaceful neighborhood. Nice yards, quiet streets, families that waved when you drove past. My backyard faces another yard, nothing unusual, but the neighbors across the way turned out to be the most unsettling part of living here. At first, it was little things. Whenever I stepped outside alone, watering the plants, hanging laundry, even just sitting with a coffee, I'd catch the father standing in his yard, arms crossed, staring. Not a glance, not a friendly wave, just a long, blank stare until I went back inside. They never spoke to me. Their kids were told not to play with mine. And if my boys laughed too loud, the neighbors would let their dogs out, barking non-stop at the fence. One afternoon, I was mowing the lawn, which takes a while, and I realized the father stood there the entire time, arms folded, just watching me cut grass. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. It went from weird to unnerving when their floodlight became part of it. It's angled directly at my sliding back door. Every night, if I even walked close to it, the light would snap on. Blinding, harsh, like I was being caught doing something wrong. I once asked politely if they could angle it differently since it shined into my son's bedroom. Their response? Silence. They just stared until I walked away. I tried to ignore it, until one night I heard something that made my stomach drop. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap against the sliding glass door. I froze. My hand went to the lock before I even realized it. I pulled the blinds back just a crack, and the second I did, their floodlight burst on. Across the yard, in the wash of white light, stood the father, still, watching, arms folded. He hadn't been there seconds before, and just as quickly as the light had come on, it shut off. He walked back inside like nothing happened. I barely slept that night. I set my phone up near the door to record, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. 2 nights later, the recording caught slow footsteps crunching in the yard gravel, circling. Then the faint sound of something scraping along the fence. My skin crawled listening to it. So I bought a camera and set it near the back door. For 2 nights, nothing. Then, on the 3rd, I saw it. The video shows the yard dark, then the floodlight snaps on. The father walks into frame. He steps right up to my sliding door and taps the glass, 3 deliberate taps. He leans close, so close the camera catches his breath fogging against the glass. And then, almost too quiet to hear, he whispers, "You should watch them." I took the video to the police. They wrote up a report but told me unless he trespassed or made a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. A week later, I confronted him. I walked to the fence, held up the printed stills, and asked what the hell he thought he was doing. He looked at the paper, then at me, and finally smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind that makes your stomach twist. And he said, "You outbid my friend for that house." Then he turned and walked back inside. That was it. That was the explanation. It doesn't explain the staring. It doesn't explain the late-night tapping or the whisper at my door. But it told me all I needed to know. He wanted me to feel unwelcome. And he succeeded. Now, cameras cover every angle of our yard. Curtains stay drawn tight. My kids don't play out back without me there. The floodlight still flashes sometimes, and the dogs still bark if we step outside. It's the first time I've ever felt like my own backyard wasn't mine. And the worst part is, he doesn't have to step foot on my property to make me feel trapped. When I was about 9 years old, I had one of the scariest nights of my life. I'd been sick all evening, drifting in and out of sleep in my parents' bed so they could keep an eye on me. I remember staring at the ceiling, where my dad's digital clock projected glowing red numbers. They seemed to wiggle and shift as I blinked. The last time I looked, it read 3:15 a.m. before I finally dozed off again. The next thing I knew, I shot awake to the sound of our doorbell. Not once, but 3 sharp rings in a row. Before I could even process it, 3 massive thuds rattled the front door. I froze. The room was still pitch dark, but when I glanced up, the numbers on the ceiling read exactly 5 a.m. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. But then both my parents sat up at the same time, whispering, "Was that the door?" My stomach dropped. If they heard it too, then it was real. The doorbell rang again, over and over, followed by loud, frantic pounding. It echoed through the hallway like whoever it was wanted to break the door down. I was terrified. Nobody should be at our door at that hour. Around that time, I'd heard stories of burglars using the trick of knocking or ringing late at night, waiting for someone to answer and then forcing their way in. My 9-year-old brain was convinced that was about to happen. My dad got up and crept downstairs, and the banging didn't stop. I could hear him shouting from the bottom of the stairs, "Who is it?" No response, just more ringing, more pounding. He shouted again, louder this time, but still nothing. It felt like the person on the other side didn't even care. The worst part was, we couldn't see who it was. The front door didn't have a peephole, and the tiny frosted window only showed shadows. I ran with my brothers from window to window upstairs, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever it was, but the angle of the house made it impossible to see the doorstep. The ringing stopped for a second, then started again, harder and faster, almost in rhythm with the pounding. The sound filled the house. My dad grabbed the phone and dialed 999. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise at the door stopped. I rushed to the upstairs window, and what I saw made my stomach twist. Not one, but 4 police cars pulled up in front of our house, and 2 fire engines. That confused me. Why fire engines? Nobody had said anything about a fire. By then, my dad had gone out to speak to the officers. We huddled upstairs, straining to hear. When he came back, he told us the truth. It turned out that our elderly neighbor, a woman who lived alone next door, had woken up convinced she smelled smoke. She was a heavy smoker, so it probably lingered in her house, but in her panic, she thought her house was burning. She ran outside and banged on our door, trying to wake us. Being hard of hearing, she hadn't heard my dad yelling back. In her panic, she also called the fire department, which explained the trucks. Hearing that explanation was such a relief, at first, because here's the part my dad left out until much later. When the police arrived, they found her outside, but she hadn't been standing at her own front door. She was standing directly in front of us, staring at it, still pressing the doorbell over and over again. And according to one officer, she didn't even acknowledge them at first. She just kept pressing the bell, whispering something under her breath that they couldn't understand. When they finally got her attention, she told them flatly, "They need to let me in. There's smoke in their house. I can see it." But there was no smoke, not in our house, not anywhere. They calmed her down and checked everything. No fire, no danger, just a frightened old woman confused by her own habits. She moved away not long after, but to this day I can still hear those sounds, the sharp rings of the doorbell in the middle of the night, the pounding so hard it shook the walls, and the echo of my dad's voice yelling, "Who is it?" into the silence. Because for a long, terrifying moment, it felt like someone wasn't just knocking to be let in. It felt like someone was trying to get us out.